Hey guys, so today I have another watercolor time lapse, and when I initially came up with the idea for today's piece, it was based on an Illustration Friday prompt, and it was very simple in comparison to some of the other ideas that I have been having recently. And essentially the idea was that I wanted to do something with blank eyes, with no irises or pupils, and the top of the head cut off with flowers coming out of it, somewhat playing with the idea that I had used previously in another piece. And I liked the idea, but a part of me thought it was too simple and that I needed there to be something more substantial. But I had the idea and I tried to brainstorm a little bit for another way to interpret the prompt, but once I had the idea, it wouldn't leave me alone. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I just couldn't get it out of my head, and I knew that I had to create the piece that I had initially envisioned. And I came to the realization that it's okay if not every single piece that I ever create is super complex and complicated, because there is meaning behind this piece, and I feel like it comes across in the finished piece of artwork. And I think it's interesting, and I think it's true to my style that I have been working with recently. And I also knew that I recently invested in some oil paints, so that will be a time lapse coming up on this channel soon. So I'm really excited for that. But I also knew that I was going to be experimenting with those, and I wanted something that would boost my confidence a little bit, because I had been putting off starting with the oils. I've started with them now, but because oils have always been very intimidating to me, because, you know, it's what the masters used, right? But I think I've come to the realization that, first of all, a lot of the masters used oil paints because that was what they had, and there wasn't a whole lot of other options. And also, I've never let something stop me before in terms of an art material. So I wanted to try digital, and I did digital. I've been working with acrylics my whole life, but I wanted to try watercolor, and I learned watercolor. So I figured, well, if I can learn all of those other things, then I think I can learn oils. And I realized that it's okay to just relax when it comes to your art sometimes, and to just have fun with it, because that's a lot of what this piece was. It was very fun, it was very relaxing. And like I said before, I feel like it's true to me. So I don't feel like that this piece was a cop-out or anything, because I don't think it was. I think it was just me having fun with my art. And I think sometimes when we get so caught up in constant improvement, we forget what I talked about in the last video, which was that sometimes improvement is small, and sometimes we need to slowly introduce ourselves to things. So with this piece, I tried a couple of different things, but I put them in a familiar context. For example, I had never used a frame like this, drawn out a frame, and I still feel as though I could probably do a better frame with practice, but it was my first time trying to do a circular format that I drew out, and it was an interesting experiment. I think it ultimately worked with the concept of the piece, and it was still fun. And I think it was still fun because I was very familiar with the other elements that I had already incorporated into the piece. For example, the color palette is very similar to color palettes that I tend towards, and I feel as though the color palettes that I choose are typically very specific to my style. I tend to use a lot of dark blues and a lot of purples. Occasionally I will use warm colors, but I typically prefer cool colors just in general as a rule. I think they lend more to the darker feeling that I work with in my pieces, and warm colors don't translate so well in the context of the pieces that I like to create. But in this piece I used a red rose, so it's a little thing, but it's kind of a bit of a focal point, and I think I like the way that it ultimately turned out. In addition, the face is a little bit bigger than I tend to work with faces because I like to incorporate full bodies into pieces that are the same size as this piece, which is a 6x9. And because of that, I was forced to think a little bit more about the shadows of the face and the different tones that I incorporated. And it wasn't a lot bigger, but I've definitely found that working bigger as a rule tends to be more difficult for me. So that was a way that I sort of stretched as well. So in the idea of continuous improvement, that improvement does not have to be big. It can be small. And in this case, I didn't do anything that was extraordinarily stand out different than what I typically tend to do. But sometimes we just need to take a breath and remember that art is supposed to be fun, not stressful, and it's supposed to make us happy. And for this piece, that's all I wanted, was I wanted to have something that would make me happy, especially when I knew that I was going to be pushing myself in the context of doing an oil painting. So this was almost a confidence booster in a way. But in the end, I really, really, really like the way it turned out. I think it is interesting, and it was a fun take on the prompt, I believe, which, if I haven't mentioned, was scoop. And the first thing I thought of was ice cream. But then I figured, well, a lot of people probably do ice cream. So I decided, well, let's scoop out the inside of her head, shall we? So it was kind of a weird way to look at it, I guess, but I really enjoyed it, and it seems to fit with the idea of things that I've been doing as of late. So I hope that this was useful in some way, and if you've been worried that the art you're doing is too simple, maybe take a look at how often the art you're doing is too simple. Because if every single piece you're doing is just like the last, then I can understand being a little frustrated and a little worried, and maybe you should push yourself a little bit more. But if all of the pieces that you've been doing recently are stretching yourself and everything is very different than the last piece, then maybe consider that you were just taking a very needed and well-deserved break, and realize that as long as you don't let yourself become complacent, you will be right back into that pushing yourself mindset very soon, if not in the very next piece you create. So thank you all for watching. If you like this piece, it is available for purchase in my Etsy shop, and you can get prints in my Society 6. There will be links in the description, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.